Yeah, if the seat had been big enough for three, I would have joined you. And that would have been special. Before we get into chapter 11, I know that you acknowledge that I am somewhat of a nerd, a macho nerd, very macho, but a nerd nonetheless. And chapter 11 was written for nerds. And so I'm going to ask you to kind of put your nerd hat on a little bit as we go through this. Because if you just tune out, you're going to miss the amazing prophetic work and the prophecy of God and the fulfillment that comes from his promises of foreknowledge. And these are amazing. Let me first say, by the way, speaking of nerds, if you are a grandfather or expect to be a grandfather and you didn't read my email yesterday, you're missing a blessing, because I have got great grandfather advice. And so go read that email. It's 4 simple lines. You don't need to read the whole thing, all the religious stuff. Just read the grandfather stuff, because it's brilliant. I've developed it on my own. I'm gonna copyright it. But back to Daniel. This is one of those sections where liberals point to, and they say that this couldn't have been written in the 6th century. Daniel, by the way, was written, according to conservatives, in the 6th century BC. And as they get into chapter 11, there are 135 prophecies that cover 34 verses. And those 135 prophecies we're going to go over today, and I'm going to try to get through them in short order. We will be late, and so there's no football today. So you're going to be fine. If your stomach starts rumbling, I'm sorry. But these 135 verses are not verses that relate to end-time prophecy. It's near-time prophecy as it relates to Daniel. You may have heard of the term the silent years. The 400 silent years are the period of time that occurred in between the Old Testament, Malachi. Malachi was written somewhere between 440 BC and 400 BC. That is the last prophetic writing in the Old Testament, all the way to 4 BC, which was the death of Herod the Great. Herod the Great's the one that tried to put Jesus to death, and so for a lot of reasons, I believe Jesus was 36 years old when he died, but that's one of them. But those 400 silent years are referred to as that, and they're not silent, because this chapter is telling you what's going to happen during those silent years. And again, liberals say that this was written in 200 BC because no way could this come about. And when you say no way, you cut the legs off of God and his ability to project his sovereignty and his majestic fulfillment and prophecy and his messages to us. And just like this prophecy came to Daniel, God has given us prophecy of end times. And we need to realize that if he can lay out these 135 prophecies in 35 verses, the prophecies that have been given for end time when Jesus comes back are very relevant. And so this, although nerdy, is a great chapter to introduce us 2 weeks ahead to the book of Revelation. Now let's go to world history, slide 4. By the way, Jesus referred to Daniel. So they say, again, the liberals, that it was written in 200 BC, but Jesus said, when you hear the abomination of desolation that was written by the prophet Daniel, then be on the lookout. He referred to that in Matthew 15. He said Daniel wrote this. This is an excellent chart. It's not mine, but it's an excellent chart of the silent years. And you see the prophet Malachi being the last of the canonical writing, canonical, yes, not mechanical, but canonical, canon written in 440 BC to 400. You see the Persian Empire, which lasted 550 BC to 331, Alexander the Great, who takes prominence all the way through the book of Daniel, including he has a outsized presence in this chapter as well. You see the Hellenistic kings. There's actually 4, but only 2 are relevant as it relates to the Bible prophecy, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids, and we'll study a lot about that. Pompey the Great is really important as the Roman. When Pompey the Great comes into Judea, he establishes the rule such that these Hellenistic kings no longer are fighting over Judea. So in Rome in and of itself is very important as a forerunner of Jesus Christ. Rome established what was called Pax Romana, which is the peace of Rome. And with the peace of Rome, they established a common language, being the Greek language. They established roads. They encouraged free transit across all of the Roman Empire. What's more, even though we study about the pressures on the Christian church in the book of Acts, prior to that, there was religious tolerance. And so Christians, first century Christians, were able to spread the word of Jesus. And it was because of Pax Romana that our faith expanded and just not blew up, but blew out. So the Hasmonean kings, you'll see the Maccabean rebellion, which we'll talk a little bit, but Antiochus Epiphanes IV was the precursor. He'll be in the book today. He'll be in the study today of the Antichrist. Because of him, there was an uprising of Jews, and that's called the Maccabean rebellion. They established the Judean kings who were Hasmonean kings, and it was under the Hasmonean kings that the Jews flourished. So all of this stuff is going on in between the 400 silent years. Now, Jim did an excellent job on Daniel 10 last week. I want to give you a little bit of the background. This is not on the slides or in your handout. This was the end. This is Daniel 10:10. Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me. The appearance of a man presumably is an angel. And he said, man greatly loved, Daniel was greatly loved, fear not, peace be with you, be strong, be of good courage. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. And he said, do you know why I have come to you? Left it hanging, and then he said, but now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. As Jim talked about, that's probably a satanic angel, a demon. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. So he is about to lay out what is in the book of truth. We're going to learn. There is none who contends by my side except Michael, your prince. Michael is generally the archangel that is defending the Jews, that's on the Hebrew side. Now I'm going to read the first verse of Daniel 11, because the first verse should actually go with chapter 10. And as for me, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen him. And so after he says that, after I have strengthened Darius the Mede, then he goes into the book of truth and he begins to outline these 135 prophecies over 34 verses.
And now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. And when he has become strong through his riches, he shall stir up against all the kingdom of Greece. Then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he wills. And as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided toward the 4 winds of heaven, but not to his posterity, nor according to the authority with which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up and go to others beside these. Then the king of the south shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger than he, and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. but she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants, he who fathered her, and he who supported her in those times.
Okay, I'm going to tell you who all these people are, and it's 34 verses of King of the North, King of the South, all that, and so it will be on the final exam, by the way. And as for me, in the first year, as for me is speaking of the angel, probably Gabriel, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I stood up to confirm and strengthen Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede, you'll recall, was the king who was deceived back in Daniel 6 and ended up throwing Daniel into the lion's den. The lions didn't do anything, and Darius the Mede issued a proclamation after he came out. So Darius the Mede says, then Darius wrote to all the peoples and nations and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. His dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who saved Daniel from the power of the lions. This is Darius the Mede, who Gabriel is going to bless. In 538, Darius and Cyrus issue a decree that allowed the Jews to go back to their home, and that was the beginning of the process for them to rebuild Jerusalem, to rebuild the temple, and all of that. So Darius has an outsized perspective. Now, in verse 2, and now I will show you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings shall arise in Persia, and a 4th shall be far richer than all of them. So let's go to the chart on slide 6. You've seen this chart. On the lower section, you'll see the Babylonian Empire. You see Daniel lasting all over, just barely inching over into the Medo-Persian Empire. And for conciseness' sake, there was only 3 boxes listed for the kings, and I can't read them. Let's go here. I've got it right here. So we have Cyrus and Darius the Mede. They were coterminous. Darius the Mede. Darius, if you remember the Mede, he has one of my favorite grandchild's names, Gubaru, right? And so no one's taken it yet, but it's available. So Darius Gubaru is ruling over the province of Babylon, and then we have Darius. And then above it, I asked Jeff to kind of break out all of the other kings that fall within the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, let's go to the next slide. This slide is prepared solely for Daniel 11, verse 2. We just read that there are 3 kings that will arise. Up at the top, you see Cyrus and Gubaru, and that's Darius the Mede. And 3 kings shall arise: Cambyses, Smerdis, and Darius the Great. Darius the Great, who did war against Greece a little bit, and then Xerxes from the book of Esther. Xerxes attacked Greece heavily. So let's go back to the scriptures. And you'll see 3 more kings shall arise in Persia. Those are the 3 kings, and a 4th shall be far richer. Xerxes far exceeded the wealth and the strength of those 3 predecessor kings. And Xerxes, according to Herodotus, the historian, amassed an army of 1,000,000 men, and he attacked Greece. This was the precursor of the Alexander the Great. Keep in mind, Alexander the Great comes in 330 BC. This is in the 400s. Xerxes attacks Greece heavily, and it's because of those attacks that Philip Macedon, and Philip is Alexander's father, and Alexander the Great decide that they're going after the Greek Empire. So God is working in this to raise Xerxes up and to attack. And so he shall stir up all against the kingdom of Greece. And that happened. He attacked in 480 BC. Verse 3, then a mighty king shall arise, who shall rule with great dominion and do as he will. And he, as soon as he has risen, his kingdom shall be broken and divided towards the 4 winds of heaven. Who might that be? whose kingdom was broken into 4 parts? Alexander. So as we go back to Daniel chapter 8, which also isn't on your slides because I want you to listen. As I was wondering, behold, and this is a prophecy of Alexander the Great being a goat. As I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground, symbolizing his speed of attack. And a great goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. The conspicuous horn is Alexander the Great. The horn is always generally is always the king. And he came and ran at the ram with 2 horns, that is Persia, with a higher horn being the Persians, which I had seen standing on the banks of a canal, and he ran at him with powerful wrath. And I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his 2 horns, and the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled him. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from power. Then the great goat became exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead there came up, listen, 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. Same term, 4 winds of heaven. As we get into this chapter 11, the 4 winds and the direction, north and south, east and west, that all is from the Jewish perspective from Jerusalem. From the Temple Mount, we're talking about kings to the north in Syria. We're talking about kings to the south. And when we talk about the 4 winds, it is the eastern, northern, western, and southern winds from Jerusalem. A mighty king shall arise. Actually, let's go to slide 8. So the goat, you've seen this slide before. Gosh, I can't see that. You'll see up in the upper left the Battle of Granicus, 334 BC. This was Alexander the Great, and this was his first great battle. And this shows the speed that he was moving east. He was like this goat that didn't touch the ground, and he was an amazing warrior in terms of tactics. And so he was able to flank the Persian army and attack their western side from a riverbank, and that was his first massive victory, and he went quickly within 1 year to the Battle of Issus, and in the Battle of Issus defeats Darius, takes Darius, one of the Dariuses, takes all of his family hostage, and he establishes a firm coastal presence that would seclude the Syrians of Antioch, and then he goes to the Battle of Gaugamela. I've talked about the Battle of Gaugamela that occurs in Kurdistan, Iraq, where I go. And I talked about being there on a trip and one of my colleagues saying there was a famous battle that was fought here. And I was teaching that like that week. This was 8 years ago. Teaching that very battle that occurred. It was the Battle of Gaugamela and Alexander the Great finally conquering the Persians on that spot. So I did this for y'all. This is my victory. So his conquest of Persia takes 5 years, and he dies at the age of 32. And as we've said, his 4 generals are laying there, or not laying there, but are around his bed, back to the scriptures, and they ask him, who shall rule? And he says, let the strong. And so his 4 generals decide, okay, not so much. And so we're not going to let the strong, let's just divide this baby up. And because of that agreement, all of their descendants were in constant warfare going back and forth. So it was Cassandra, Lysimachus. Those were to the east. That was in Greece and in Asia Minor, which is Turkey. And then in the north were the Seleucids, and in the south were the Ptolemies. The Seleucids and the Ptolemies, as we saw on the silent years, are the ones that are relevant. And that's on slide 9. On slide 9, you'll see the Seleucids up in Syria and Ptolemy, and all during this time, as we get into these scriptures, the Seleucids and Ptolemies are fighting. And during these fights, Jerusalem and Judea are changing hands. And so this history is important, and the reason this section of scripture is not written in Aramaic like earlier parts of Daniel, this is written in Hebrew because this is a message to God's people. And so, again, back to the scriptures. Sorry, Brett. There'll be a mighty king arise who shall rule with great dominion, and as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken and divided to the four winds of heaven, but not to his posterity. He had two sons. One was an illegitimate son, probably both were illegitimate sons, and they were murdered young. And it was not according to the authority he ruled. He also had an uncle, Philip, who was the brother of his father, and he was murdered as well. And so his kingdom was going to go outside those to the four winds, which would be the four generals. Then the king of the south, verse 5, shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger and shall rule, and his authority shall be a great authority. Nerd alert. Let's go to slide 10. All right. This, for those of you who want to actually put chapter 11 on your refrigerator, because this is loaded with stuff that you're going to want on your refrigerator, this helps you know who you're talking about. So the yellow numbers on the left of each of the kings are the actual verses that correspond with chapter 11. And so Ptolemy the first of Soter is the first general. He and Seleucus Nicator are the first, in verse 5. And all the way through this, historians have been able to map out from what was prophesied to Daniel and to look at the kings that came after them. And so it's actually amazing that these 135 prophecies neatly fit for each of these kings. So let's go back to the scriptures. Then the king of the south, this was Ptolemy the first of Soter, shall be strong, but one of his princes shall be stronger. So what happened is that Seleucus, who was the other general, was being attacked. And as he's being attacked from outsiders, he asked for Ptolemy's help. Ptolemy asked him to pledge his loyalty. That's perfect. That works. That's one. And so pledge his loyalty to him, and thus he became, in essence, a prince. He had to be loyal, and he had to be subservient to the southern king. And so, but when he did that and he was bailed out by Ptolemy, he began amassing land, amassing assets, and he became stronger and stronger and stronger, such that he became stronger than Ptolemy. So, back to verse 5, and his rule shall be a great authority. Okay, verse 6, after some years they shall make an alliance. So these are new kings. We'll see on the wall of kings in just a second. After some years they shall make an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the strength of her arm, and he and his arm shall not endure. But she shall be given up, and her attendants he who fathered her and who supported her in those times. Okay, anybody want to explain that? Okay, I got it. All right, let's go to the wall of kings. Okay, now we are in verse 6, Ptolemy II, Philadelphus, and Antiochus II, Theos. So they hate each other, and they decide to make an alliance. And so Ptolemy II of Philadelphus decides, what better way to make an alliance than to give him my daughter? So he gives him his daughter Bernice as part of this great alliance. Only problem is Antiochus is already married and has a queen, and her name is Laodice, and Laodicea is named after her. So she doesn't like being women don't like that, guys. You should write that down. So she's kind of moved off on the side, and Bernice becomes the queen, and that works great until Ptolemy II of Philadelphus dies. And then Antiochus II says, I think I like Laodice better than Bernice. So he brings her back in to the bedchamber. And so Laodice decides, you know what? We don't need Bernice around. So she has Bernice and her son killed. And she said, that felt good. And so she poisons Antiochus II. Again, guys, write this down. She poisons Antiochus. He dies, and she ends up ruling with Seleucus II, who is her son. Interestingly, this is not part of chapter 11, but it is part of what went on in the silent years. During the silent years, Hebrew had become a dead language, totally dead. Greek had replaced it. Greek, in my view, is a better language. It's more detailed. It's more rich. The words are more descriptive, and so you get a much clearer picture. Philadelphus, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, decided, I want to have a library that's got every book in the world. And so his librarian said, we've got a lot of Jews around here, and one of these books that's really important to them is the Book of Moses, but no one can understand what it is. So he summons the high priest, Eleazar, and he says, I would like to actually have this book that no one can read because it's a dead language, converted into Hebrew. He said, can you send me 6 scribes from each of the tribes of Israel, 72 people? There's arguments about whether it's 72 or 70. And they begin to write the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, which is called the Septuagint. And so as you see the Septuagint written, it is written LXX, which is the Roman numeral for 70. And so it represents 70. And as you read references in the New Testament from Jesus or from Paul, as they reference the Old Testament, they're quoting from the Septuagint. They are going to that. So it's during his time that, also, sidetrack, this is the reason we're going to be late, because I'm going to do this. In the Septuagint, Daniel is written, and Daniel is included with the prophets. So when Jesus talks about him being the prophet Daniel, it is in the prophet section. Okay, back to the scriptures. So Ptolemy dies, and it says, and her arm shall not endure, so that's Bernice, she shall not endure, and he who supported those, okay, covered all that. So let's go to the next passage. Daniel 11:7. Sorry?
And from a branch, from her roots, one shall arise in his place, and he shall come against the army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he shall deal with them and shall prevail. He shall also carry off to Egypt their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and for some years he shall refrain from attacking the king of the north. Then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land. His sons shall wage war and assemble a multitude of great forces, which shall keep coming and overflow and pass through, and again shall carry the war as far as his fortress. And the king of the south, moved with rage, shall come out and fight against the king of the north, and he shall raise a great multitude, but it shall be given into his hand. And when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted, and he shall cast down tens of thousands, but he shall not prevail. For the king of the north shall again raise a multitude greater than the first, and after some years he shall come on with a great army and abundant supplies.
All right, perfectly clear, right? All right, let's go to the Wall of Kings. So verse 7 we see is Ptolemy III. And verse 7 is Seleucus II. Ptolemy III is the brother of Bernice. And so Ptolemy III is not real wild about Laodice murdering Bernice. And so he is the one that is a branch from her who is Bernice's roots. And it says, and one shall arise in his place, and he shall come against the army. He came against Seleucus, who is the son of Laodice. And so he comes against her, and he kills Laodice. He doesn't kill the son, but he kills Laodice, and they end up entering into an alliance. But the way he came into the alliance, he basically killed his mother, and he said, okay, let's do an alliance. Here's the way this is going to work. I'm going to haul off all your plunder. I'm going to take all your stuff, and then I'll agree not to attack you. And he's like, okay, that sounds like a perfect alliance. So they form an alliance, and all of the idols and precious metals and everything gets hauled off. And they signed the treaty in 240 BC. A treaty is actually signed between the Egypt and Syria, these two kings. And then the latter, and then Seleucus II says, you know, that was a bad deal. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to get my plunder. So he goes and he attacks Ptolemy III. And as it says in verse 9, then the latter shall come into the realm of the king of the south, but shall return to his own land because he wasn't able to overthrow him. And then his sons. So we see Seleucus III and Antiochus III the Great. These are the sons, these are the grandsons of Laodice. And they together begin to attack. They're brothers. Seleucus III invades Asia Minor, he goes directly west and attacks the land of Turkey, which is where he's going towards the Romans right now. And his brother Antiochus goes south towards Egypt. Seleucus III ends up dying, and Antiochus the Great takes over. Antiochus III, he's called great because he was great in battle. So he takes over, and it says, let's go back to the scripture. Verse 10, his sons shall wage war, that's the two sons, Seleucus III and Antiochus III, and assemble a multitude of great forces which shall keep coming and overthrow and pass through. And when they say pass through, it's from the perspective of Judea, which means Israel. So they take over Israel, and they carry it as far as the fortress. Then the king of the south, verse 11, let's go back to the wall of kings. Verse 11, now we have a new king, Ptolemy IV, and we're still on Antiochus the Great. So Antiochus IV, when the multitude is taken away, his heart shall be exalted. He shall cast down tens of thousands, but he will not prevail against Antiochus. For the king of the north shall raise again a multitude bigger than the first, and after some years he will become great with army and abundant supplies. I know isn't this fun? Refrigerator stuff. I know it's awesome. But you begin to see in these scriptures the nature of the conflict that's going on all the time. And you see kings that are rising and kings that are falling, and you see the prominence of God's people and things going in disarray, and it's not unlike today. And so we're sitting here and we look through our perspective and we think the whole world is going to hell when a certain politician gets elected. All of a sudden another politician gets elected, and what God promises is that there's going to be conflict right up until the second coming. There is going to be chaos, and there's going to be people that step away from God's purpose. There's going to be a great falling away that we'll study about in Revelation. God's plan is in the middle of this chaos, but he's in total control. He laid this out and said, this will happen, and it happened. And it's going to happen for the second coming of the Antichrist. And so we need to have our goggles on, and we need to watch what's happening when God promises the rise and fall of the leaders. Linda?
In these times many shall rise against the king of the south, and the violent among your own people shall lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they shall fail. Then the king of the north shall come and throw up siege works and take a well-fortified city. The forces of the south shall not stand, or even his best troops, for there shall be no strength to stand. But he who comes against him shall do as he wills, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land with destruction in his hand. He shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom, and he shall bring terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give them the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom, but it shall not stand to be to his advantage. Afterward he shall turn his face to the coastlands and shall capture many of them. But a commander shall put an end to his insolence. Indeed, he shall turn his insolence back upon him. Then he shall turn his face back toward the fortresses of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. Then shall arise in his place one who shall send an actor of tribute for the glory of the kingdom. But within a few days he shall be broken, neither in anger nor in battle.
Verse 14, in those times many shall rise against the king of the south. Antiochus the Great, Antiochus the Third, the Great, convinces the Macedonians, convinces the Jews, and all of the locals to go attack the king of the south. And when they do that, presumably the Jews believe that they're going to be set free, but they side with Antiochus the Great, the Third. And as he comes marching in, as he prevails and comes marching into Jerusalem, they welcome him with open arms. And he attacks a fortified city, which is, before he comes into Jerusalem, and that fortified city, we find out through history, is Sidon, which is in Lebanon. And no one could stand against him. And it says at the end of verse 16, he shall stand in the glorious land, which is, what is the glorious land? Israel is Judea, Jerusalem, with destruction on his hand. And he shall, verse 17, shall set his face to come with the strength of his whole kingdom. And he shall bring the terms of an agreement to perform them. As we begin to look, again, this is a precursor to the way the devil works. We see that each of these kings is devious, and they come with flattery, and they come with goods, they come with women, and they are looking to deceive and to destroy. And that is the devil's, that is his modus operandi, to deceive and destroy. The devil's, his whole purpose is to lay out for us things that are pretty, things that are fun, things that are attractive, that will lead us down a place where we are choked like a snare and ultimately destroyed. And these kings are doing this against each other. This is screaming out that this is the way of the devil. Verse 17, he shall bring the terms of an agreement and perform them. He shall give him the daughter of women to destroy the kingdom. So Antiochus the Great decides, okay, the best way to overcome the king of the south, I've come into Jerusalem, I can't push any further. The best way to win this over is we've got a young king, he is sitting on the throne, and he's only 10 years old. I'm going to give him my daughter, Cleopatra. This is not Cleopatra of Mark Antony. This is a predecessor of hers, like 100 years. But it is in her lineage, Cleopatra. I'm going to give this 10-year-old king, who is being managed by advisors, Cleopatra. Surely my daughter will be loyal to me over the king of the south, the 10-year-old. Cleopatra goes totally native. And she ends up supporting Ptolemy, this king, and she ends up having another king, and he's an infant, and she ends up, when her husband dies, she ends up actually sitting on the throne, and she is the first female pharaoh, if you will, that ruled before the Cleopatra that you've studied about in history. And so she ruled for him in 180 BC, so you can see that we're getting close. Antiochus is frustrated because things aren't going his way, and he's not able to go south, so he decides to go west towards the Aegean Sea, which is in the land of Greek and the Romans. Claudius Scipio. If you don't want to name your grandchild Gubaru, use Scipio. Claudius Scipio turns him back, and then he shall turn his face back towards the fortress of his own land. And so Antiochus the Great goes back to Antioch of Syria, and there he dies. It's unknown how he dies, but here it says that he shall stumble and fall and shall not be found. That is in line with the prophecy. Verse 20, then shall arise one in his place who shall send an exactor of tribute. That's a guy that taxes. And so Seleucus the Fourth comes on the scene, and he decides, like Democrats, that's just a joke if you're a Democrat, but tax and spend, I know. And so Seleucus says, we're going to tax everybody. I'm going to exact tributes from everybody. Well, not everybody likes to be taxed. Like, I don't. Who likes to be taxed? Anybody? See, you're all Republicans. So he decides that there's a tax collector who he doesn't even like to be taxed. So he decides to kill the king, and Heliodorus, that'll be on the final exam. Heliodorus is the tax collector, and he ends up killing the king. All right, verse 21.
In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He shall come in without warning and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. Armies shall be utterly swept away before him and broken, even the prince of the covenant. And from the time that an alliance is made with him, he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. Without warning he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his father nor his father's fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. He shall devise plans against strongholds, but only for a time, and he shall stir up his power in his heart against the king of the south with a great army. And the king of the south shall wage war with an exceedingly great and mighty army, but he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Even those who eat his food shall break him. His army shall be swept away, and many shall fall down slain. And as for the two kings, their hearts shall be bent on doing evil. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail. For the end is yet to be at the time appointed. And he shall return to his land with great wealth. But his heart shall be set against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land.
More is written in this section about Antiochus IV Epiphanes than any of the other kings and the 30 verses ahead of this. This is because he is the little horn. He is the model of the Antichrist that is to come. And so we should look at how he operates. In his place shall arise a contemptible person to whom royal majesty has not been given. He wasn't supposed to be the king. Seleucus' sons were supposed to be the king. But through bribery and flattery and murder, he established himself as the king. And he came without warning and obtained it by flatteries, again, through murder, etc. And the army shall be swept away before him and broken, even as the Prince of Covenant. We'll come to the Prince of Covenant. But he started small. He was deceitful. He started with a very small group, and he grew and grew and grew, and he grew through bribing people. And from that time, verse 23, an alliance is made with him, and he shall act deceitfully, and he shall become strong with a small people. That's the small people. That's a limited number of people. And without warning, he shall come into the richest parts of the province, and he shall do what neither his fathers or fathers have done, scattering among them plunder, spoil, and goods. His modus operandi was to come in and to take from those that he could defeat and then give it to those he could bribe. And by giving it to those and spreading the plunder, he became great. He was a multi-level marketer, right? He was taking and spreading. And he was absolutely growing strong through doing this. And the king of the south shall wage war. That's the Ptolemies. This is Ptolemy the Sixth. But he shall not stand, for plots shall be devised against him. Verse 26, even those who eat his food, this is Ptolemy, shall break from him. The people that were closest to Ptolemy were bribed. They were given things behind the scenes by Antiochus, and then they turned on their own king. And that, again, is the model for the Antichrist. And as for the two kings, Ptolemy the Sixth and Antiochus, the Epiphanes, they sat at the banquet, both trying to deceive the other. They shall speak lies at the same table, but to no avail, and they sat down together. Antiochus Epiphanes was the one who minted his own coins. If you go to slide 16, these are the coins that he minted. And on the right side, the vertical words on the left, you'll see down below, say Theos Epiphanes. Epiphanes means illustrious ones. And the Jews changed his name, and behind his back would call him Antiochus Epimanes, which means madman. And so this guy had it out, we'll see, has it out for the Jews. Let's go back again to the scripture. So he sits down, they sit down, and he shall return to his land. He has turned back, and he's not able to come over, but he goes back with great wealth in verse 28, and his heart will be set against the holy covenant. So as he is king, there is a guy named Jason, a Jew named Jason, that says, I think I'd like to be high priest. This guy seems to be good at bribery, so he goes to Antiochus Epiphanes and he says, can I buy the high priesthood? Epiphanes says, I like that idea. And so he takes the bribe and he makes Jason, who is not a descendant of Aaron, he makes him the high priest. There's a guy that's a little bit richer named Menelaus. He is a Jew, and he says, well, that worked for him. I've got more money than him. So he goes to Antiochus and he says, can I buy the priesthood? Antiochus says, sure, I've got one available. He cast Jason out. And so he set his mind against the holy covenant, and he shall work his will and return to his own land. I'm going to read the last. Daniel 11:29. At the time appointed, he shall return and come, this is Antiochus Epiphanes, shall come to the south, but it shall not be this time as it was before, for ships of Kittim shall come against him. And he shall be afraid and withdraw, and shall turn back and be enraged and take action against the holy covenant. He shall turn back and pay attention to those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him shall appear and profane the temple and the fortress, and shall take away the regular burnt offering, and they shall set up the abomination that makes desolate. He shall seduce with flattery those who violate the covenant, but the people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And the wise among them shall make many understand, though for some days they shall stumble by the sword and flame and by captivity and plunder. And when they stumble, they shall receive little help, and many shall join themselves with flattery. And some of the wise shall stumble, so that they may be refined, purified, and made white until the time of the end, for it awaits the appointed time. Antiochus Epiphanes would attack and continue to attack until the Romans became so strong, and these ships from Kittim are the Roman Navy, and they stopped him, and it enraged him. And so when he became enraged, he decided to take it out on the soft target, the Jews. And so it says, and he would take action against the Holy Covenant. His mission was to exterminate Judaism, to totally exterminate. The abomination that makes desolate means that he was going to desecrate the most holy of their sites until it was desecrated beyond worship, such that the Jews wouldn't worship there. It wasn't to go to Jerusalem. It wasn't to go to the temple. It wasn't to go into the temple itself. It was to go into the Holy of Holies and set up a god other than God. It was to put a swine on the altar that was considered sacred and sacrifice it. It was to take every single book of the covenant and burn it. It was to erase the signs of circumcision. It was to murder mothers who had their 8-day-old sons circumcised. It was to eradicate. And that is why the Jews call this the abomination that caused desolation. And that's why Jesus says, when we talk about Daniel and the abomination of desolation, be aware, because there's going to be another one. There's going to be another. They seduced with flattery those who violate the covenant. They were successful in bribing and getting Jews to turn, and those would have been the progressives of the day. Those that said, you know, this is not that bad. We can live with Antiochus. We don't have to stand up. We don't have to live up to the covenant. It's okay. A swine burning is okay, so we're going to side with you. And they violated the law. And in verse 32, the end of 32, one of the most awesome. The people who know their God shall stand firm and take action. And so if you had to walk away with any theme, it wouldn't be all of these kings, these 135. It would be that there are times you have to stand up and take action. And so these Jews who were righteous were the forerunners of the Pharisees in a good way. The Pharisees who decided this is the law, we're going to follow the law. The Hasidics, the Jews that said, you see the black hats? So these are called Hasidic Jews. Those are people who just in the 1948, after Hitler had done all of his work, they said, we've got to stand firm. And so the Hasidic movement moved out of Poland. That's why they still wear this old Polish stuff, the black stuff that's from 1940 Poland. And they believe that their job is to study the Torah, and that men are not supposed to work. They're supposed to study the whole time so that they can spread the word. And they're supposed to be prolific, meaning when you get your wife, you make her work, but you make sure she's pregnant all the time. And so my conservative friends that are not Hasidic say, you know, if you go, the way they fund themselves is by begging. And they say, if you go to Jerusalem and you see a Hasidic Jew begging with his hat out, looking for money, throw a condom in, and because that will help stop this thing from proliferating. That's a true story. I didn't make that. That's just for free for you guys. You don't have to pay for that. So this uprising, these Jews that rose up to fight, formed the Maccabean revolt. This was John Maccabees, who fought and overcame Antiochus Epiphanes, and that was called the Maccabean revolt. Those the beginning of the Hasmonean kings. That was the day when they overthrew and took back over the temple. That is the day Jews today celebrate Hanukkah as the religious day, the Maccabean revolt. Let's go to slide 19. As we look, some of these Jews became stronger and some of them went the wrong way. First Maccabees is, again, this is an apocryphal book. This is not part of our canon, but it's very good for history. And so First Maccabees 1:10 says, from these descendants sprouted a sinful root, Antiochus Epiphanes. He was the son of King Antiochus, and he had been brought up in Rome as a hostage. Antiochus Epiphanes began to rule in the year 137. That's not our calendar, that's the Greek calendar, as it says, according to the calendar of the Greek kingdom. At that time, so Antiochus is about 176 BC, just so you know. At that time, some renegade Israelites emerged. These people went against their ancestral laws and encouraged many other Jews to join them. They spoke up saying, let's make an agreement with the Gentiles around us because many horrible things have happened to us since we separated ourselves from them. The proposal pleased their fellow Jews, and some of them eagerly went to King Antiochus, who gave them permission to start living by the laws of the Gentiles. Consequently, they built a gymnasium in Jerusalem following Gentile custom, and they even took steps to remove the marks of circumcision, utterly abandoning the Holy Covenant. They joined with the Gentiles and gave themselves over to an evil course. And so you see the two different paths that the Jews took. You have the ones that were willing to stand up and be firm and take a stand, and you have those that were going to collapse and go against God's will. Let's go to the themes on slide 20. I'm assuming this is AI. We've lost because they didn't actually have Bibles then, but it's a great picture. So, but they're studying God's word either way. Although there's not much thematic in the actual words of looking at the king of the south and the alliances and giving daughters and the king of the north. There are things that come out, and the first is prophecy and fulfillment, in that God has told us what will happen. And we can look at the near term for Daniel and see that 135 prophecies came to light and came to pass. And we can look forward to Revelation and Daniel and the 70 weeks, and we can be assured that there will be a fulfillment of all of God's prophecies. We can see that there is conflict and struggle, that there is good and evil, and that good and evil and that struggle will continue until the day all of this is over. And at that point in time, we can worship God. We'll be in the millennial kingdom and ultimately the new Jerusalem and the new heaven and earth. We can see that human pride and downfall have greatly impacted many kingdoms as kings work for their own purposes and have their own pretty things that they're going after, power and money and greed, and all it resulted in is their downfall. We can see God's sovereignty, that regardless of whether you decide to be a progressive or not, that God's purpose will be done, that he is in control, and the book that has been written that will come to pass is his, and it will happen. And you can see that there is a perseverance, there is an option to be faithful, and that you can be one of those who stands up and is firm.